Welcome back, I'm Tedward, and today we've got a rare Mercedes-Benz R129 because this is a 300 SL from 1991, one of about 242 manual versions of this imported to the US that year. There's only about 400 or a little less than 400 manual 300 SLs out there, and the 300 SL was the only version of the R129 that ever came with a manual gearbox. This one beautifully finished in desert taupe metallic, and interior is brown. So it maybe wasn't the star of the show in 1991, but today this has aged quite gracefully. This is actually the first R129 that's ever been on the channel, and thanks to a subscriber and friend, we are going to drive this. If it looks familiar and you're one of those people who really peruses cars and bids and bring a trailer, you'll recognize this car because it sold on cars and bids pretty recently. It's just been gone over and serviced by EAS in Waltham, and then Q Car Care did a full paint correction, and now this thing is looking pretty prime for a review. But let's talk specs. Under the hood of the baby SL is a 3-liter inline 6 dual overhead cams making 230 horsepower, just a hair over 200 pound-feet of torque. So this is not a muscle car, it is not a powerhouse, but it is a luxury cruiser sports car, which is really what the SL is all about. And if you'll notice, this is called the 300 SL. When I say 300 SL, to most people, they're thinking $2 million and gull wings. That's the deal. But back in the early 90s, they were still using the nomenclature where they would put the engine size first, followed by the model. Then only a couple years later, within the R129 generation, they swapped it. And by then, the 300 was no longer, and they went to an SL 320. So there are models that are 500 SLs, and there are models that are SL 500s within the same generation. Early cars often had two-tone paint jobs. So what you would see is maybe like a nice green paint, and then this might be gray. This is also in an era of Mercedes when things were just overbuilt. This has the famed mono wiper as seen here from our big rig that I was driving the other day. And then down here, you even have little wipers on the headlights. Now this was a thing that people were kind of trying out in the industry for a little while. It didn't really stick, but even Volvos had that. Now you might notice that these wheels are not original. We got to get those monoblocks back on here, but these are sort of a Brabus wheel, and chrome, maybe not the best way to show off this paint job, but I still think it fits the car, especially as a 90s car. You couldn't do this today. If this is a modern car, we might be like, oh, that's too much. But because this is 91, I feel like we can get away with a little bit of chrome on this thing. And surprisingly, this is a square setup on these 18-inch wheels. It's a 245 section tire front and rear disc brakes all around, of course. Even though this was the baby SL, this still had an MSRP of $78,800. This was not a cheap car in 1991. That is a lot of money. And we look at SLs today and the astronomical price tag that comes along with an SL63. It's pretty alarming, but you got to remember these were always a little bit unobtainable. These always made you look wealthy because the price of entry was quite high, but not so today. In an R129, you can get into a nice one for around $20,000. So let me show you under the hood. First, we'll pop this, and then under here, there's a little lever that we pull right through the emblem. And there it is, our inline 6. And this is wild because most of these were V8s. So when you get under here, you can tell that this engine compartment was certainly designed for a larger power plant. And there's just so much room down here, which actually, I guess, would make it a little easier to work on, aside from the fact that all the goods are kind of buried in here. Of course, fuel injected. Look at this giant air filter set up over here. But it's just funny when you have all this real estate left over on this side. You'd never see anything like this today. They would just cover it all or bury a bunch of other equipment in there. Lots and lots and lots of sound deadening, and really nice to see that this is still intact. This is the kind of stuff that mice love to go after. Hello. The SL is, of course, a convertible, but this was prior to hardtop convertible actuation. So this is a fixed hardtop that you would have to remove yourself with you and a friend, or if you had the garage mounted hoist, you'd pull into your garage, link it up, and remove the hardtop and just kind of leave it resting along the ceiling of your garage, or you store it somewhere and hopefully you don't put it too close to the lawn equipment so all the interior stuff gets gross, then you just use the soft top and enjoy it. But this was just recently paint corrected at Q Car Care locally, and they wanted the hardtop on so they could do all of the work. Something I find pretty wild is that we've got a switchblade key from 1991. This is fantastic. And when we lock and unlock the doors, we've got these lights down here, which I guess do not work any longer, but normally this would light up green or red to tell you that you've locked or unlocked the car. And that is on every lock on the car, including back here. To open the trunk, we push in, revealing our lovely brown interior. They've even done the little stripes on here. Man, this really was detailed nicely. And plenty of space for golf clubs and things. But what you can tell about this car is it just feels like such an upgrade from its predecessor. The earlier SLs, they were wallowy, they were big, they felt great as cruisers, but they just didn't feel very sporty. And while this is still a big car, it is not a sports car, really, if we're talking about canyon carving. It handles fine, but it just feels so much more composed. And that goes to show all the technology that went into this. Look at how big these seats are. Everything is kind of overdone, overbuilt, and that's why it's hard to say this is a sports car, because it certainly doesn't look like lightness was important to Mercedes-Benz. They put big chunky everything here. There's some seat controls down here, and then we can look in the rear. There's some compartments under here. So there's a lot of storage in this car, which is pretty wild. No rear seats. This is a proper two-seater. And over here, this actually locks with the car. So there's no glove box because you've got a passenger side airbag, but you can put a bunch of stuff in the center console and in the doors. And when you lock the car, you're able to actually lock those compartments, which is great because a lot of people in these cars are just going to leave that top down. In here, we've got some fun rollaway stuff for our cigarette lighter and a little extra storage down there. More storage. And then, like I said, no glove box, but this pops up for a little extra storage if you need it. And I believe in higher trim level vehicles, there was a car phone, and I think some of the controls were here. And if you're used to the predecessor of this SL, you'd be very used to this display. This dashboard looks almost identical to that of its predecessor. Even these controls with the little orange guy here for the headlights, it's just a very familiar cabin. So you could imagine someone upgrading their car from like an 80s SL into a 90s SL and feeling right at home, but also just feeling a lot more solid. All of this stuff just feels much better built, and this is really the heyday of overbuilt Mercedes. Now, if we didn't have the hardtop on and we wanted to put up or down the roof, this is our button right here. It's actually in the shape of the roof with the little rear window and the side windows. Very cool. So it let you know exactly what it was. And then over here, this is your roll bar, because you could actually put the roll bar up or down if you so choose to have the look. To start our rare manual SL, we've got our key right here, ignition down here. Classic Mercedes sounds. Oh, it's not happy with the start. Let's see if we can get it to go again. Not thrilled with the hot start, but now it's good to go. I have no qualms about this car. I know it's going to be fine. Down here, when we plug in our seatbelt, you even notice this is weird. This is the strangest seatbelt holder I've seen. Okay. Our climate control, very simple, giant automatic button. Blows very cold. You instantly feel that compressor come on and wick some power away. We can knock that down to a 2. And this is a dogleg 5-speed. So if you're unfamiliar with what that means, it means that instead of first being over and forward, it's over and down. So no, I am not putting it in second gear every time I start off in this car. I'm actually just putting it in first, then second and third. The idea behind a dog leg is because typically you use second and third more often. So if you're on a racetrack or on a fun little road, you want those to be in line. Now, the way a shifter typically works is you're going to center it right here. So that way, all you have to do if you're like in third, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to go across a gate. You just have to go straight forward for your downshift, straight back for your upshift. See how this gets off the line. Into first gear. So first gear is pretty long. It's a tall gear. It's not gonna buck around like a Bronco. You're gonna be able to smoothly release that clutch. But if you notice, the shifts are not rapid fire. The revs take a little bit of time to come back down. The gearbox, buttery smooth and happy, but it's not a box you wanna rush. You wanna just kind of let it, like you ask for it, you request the gear and it slips right in. Very happy. But you do need to get those revs up if you wanna get into that power band. Not a whole lot of low end grunt, which is very different than SLs that I'm used to. Usually I'm thinking of big V8 lazy SLs where idle to 3,000 RPM is almost all you need most of the time, but not the case with this inline six. Oh, but it sounds so good. That's the thing. This is fun to row your own gears in this car. And it makes the car feel a lot livelier than its automatic counterparts. Because remember, this would have a 4-speed automatic transmission if it were not for this 5-speed dogleg manual. Those gearboxes are great. They're great for being kind of a lumbering, cruising car, but they are not really great for feeling connected to the car. They're cruisers, and there's a real special feeling to be in this. See if we can get some of this exhaust noise off the rocks. Very subdued, very progressive power band, and then we get into the suspension. It's supple. Yes, there is body roll, but it feels so controlled. I love this car. This is wonderful. This is the cruiser you want at the beach. This is the cruiser you want to go to dinner in. This is where you feel comfortable parking it anywhere. It's not this harsh, rock solid sports car that is a chore to drive, that you drive for the appearance of it. This is the car that you drive because it's the one you want to be in. Insulation, fantastic. Very little road noise coming from the outside the cabin. I hear like almost nothing. I mean, obviously helpful to have the hard top on. I'm not sure it would be quite as easy and quiet if we had the soft top up. Got to give it a real bootful on those downshifts because this engine is not that quick to rev. I'm sure it's a big, heavy dual mass flywheel. Not positive if it's dual mass. I just assume it probably is for the sake of luxury. And the steering is so light, but I feel everything. Obviously, it's hydraulic. This is not an electric power-assisted steering rack from the 90s. No, this is giving me lots of feedback from the road, but I'm having to put such little effort into the steering that I feel like I could just drive this car forever. when you turn the AC on, there is an instant reaction with this throttle. You notice that everything gets a little heavier because suddenly there's this big old school compressor weighing down this engine. You definitely notice power loss when you put the AC on. And actually, if we're talking about a kind of a heavy flywheel, the revs come down faster because that compressor is dragging on that engine. So that you notice that downshift, I didn't get out of the clutch fast enough and we dragged it a little bit. That's because that compressor just dragged this engine down. Great visibility as well. Even with the hardtop, we don't lose much out of that rear quarter. But man, this thing is just so smooth. It soaks up the world around you. The engine's playful. It wants to be revved out. Now, I believe this has a limited slip diff because I can hear just the tiniest bit of whining when I'm going around a corner. But that's pretty lovely to have. Comes alive over 4,500 RPM for sure. We get into it full throttle. Smooth in line 6. Look at that. Don't want to go over blind corners around here without line of sight, so we'll cool it off a little bit. Now, new Mercedes, oof, man, they're just taking a downturn right now. They're in a rough spot. I feel like quality is declining. The driving experience is declining. I drove the newest SL a couple years ago out in California, and while it is outrageously fast and capable, it's kind of a heavy lumbering beast that doesn't seem to know what it is. It's trying to be a too harsh sports car in its sport mode, and it's also trying to be a luxury cruiser in its comfort modes, and I don't think it does either particularly well. This car understands what it is. It is not a canyon carver, and it is not a track car. It is a luxury sporting experience. There's no lap time set by this car to sell it. It is just a car that is good. And this is what I miss about the auto industry. Cars that are just made to be good cars and they don't have to go and compete at the Nürburgring. Into top gear at 70. I mean, it takes a while to get there, but it's fun. You enjoy this engine. I mean, the gearbox, if you put like a shorter rear end in it, I think it would maybe liven it up, but who cares? That is, again, not the purpose of this thing. See how it gets around a corner. Yeah, man, the brakes are potent. Everything functions. It's funny, you watch me go for a gear and I reached in the wrong spot because there's a dog leg. So in my brain, I'm like, well, it should be up here, it's down here. But, you know, you get used to that. It's okay. I've been driving the car for about 20 minutes. It's not shocking. As long as I don't put it in reverse at a red light, we should be good to go. Handling wise, it'll get the job done. It'll get around the corner. It does feel a little bit like the front and rear of the car don't necessarily know what each other are doing. So when you chuck it into a corner, the rear takes a second to follow behind. But it's not scary or alarming. It's just that this is kind of a big, heavy thing, and it just is settling into its corner. Once you get used to what you need from the throttle for a downshift, really smooth, really easy to drive. And despite having a little bit of weight and a little bit of softness to the suspension, it's still very easy to kind of dart around. Like if I'm like, ooh, I don't want to hit this manhole cover, we can avoid it, and it's all so composed and together. It's fantastic. It's absorbing all the bumps, and look how good this interior is. No rattles. This is 1991, and this is all intact and perfect. This is build quality, man. This is when the Germans were like going way above and beyond. Everything today has 500-600 horsepower when they've got Mercedes badges on them and they're special cars. This is a special Mercedes with less than 250 horsepower, and it's fantastic. When we're talking about driving and owning older cars, and it's depressing, this is basically vintage at this point, but 1991 was a long time ago, and a lot of times you have to make excuses for your older cars to make sense in your collection or for the drive. Now, if you have a modern Lexus or Mercedes and you're like, well, that's the car I drive day to day, and then on the weekends I do some special trips in my vintage sports car or something. Well, sure, it makes sense, because day to day, a lot of times older cars, especially like 80s and 90s cars, aren't the greatest daily drivers. They're loud, or they're maybe a little broken in some regards, or maybe they're down on power, or any number of things might irk you as a day-to-day driver. But what's wild about this R129 is that it doesn't. I feel very natural and comfortable and happy in this car in 2024. And I feel as though I could just comfortably use this all year round for all of the things, whether it's running down to the shops for my groceries or going out to a Cars and Coffee and a cheeky little drive after the fact. This car is built well. I'm not listening. Listen, I've got a giant Freightliner next to me, and I'm barely interrupted by it because this is properly insulated, and I don't feel scared like I'm in some unsafe thing from 30 years ago. To me, the R129 goes to show that if you put the energy, effort, money, and design budget up front and front load the production of a car with knowledge, experience, and proper goals, not just bean counting. Really, you could tell that whoever built this car was very proud to design and build this car. It will stand the test of time. We've been driving some old 60s and 70s Mercedes, and sure, they need bushings and suspension components and some TLC here and there, but overall, they're tanks. They feel fantastic. And this R129, it's a modern car. Sure, it's OBD1, but it is a modern car, but it doesn't seem to make sacrifices for being 30 plus years old. I feel like I can get in this car in 2024 and, having put some work into it to make sure it's sealed up and the suspension is in good nick and we've got good brakes, it feels very natural, comfortable, and easy to drive this on a normal road. And that is not always the case. When you drive old Porsches from this era, even a 964, sometimes you feel a little small. You feel a little, ooh, this definitely feels like I need to be a little cautious. I don't want to get hit. Is this going to be okay? Or maybe it's a little loud. I mean, sure, we're nitpicking here, but this still feels like a luxury car all these years later, and that's wild. That tells me that this was worth every bit of its $79,000 when it was new in 91, because you could just keep driving it. So, thank you so much to my friend Sam, a subscriber, who tossed me the keys to this thing, who really trusted that this was going to be special. I'm not saying I was questioning him, but I wasn't sure if I was going to really fall in love with this car. And my goodness, he was right. This is fantastic. If you're a subscriber and you've got something weird or fun or special to you that you think I might like driving, please reach out. TedwardDrives@gmail.com. I'm in central Massachusetts, and maybe if I'm traveling, I'll come find something you've got. But I want to do some of these subscriber specials because I just find some of the wildest stuff that you guys have that you've poured your heart and souls into, and it's fantastic. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive, and I'll see you in the next one.